Dear friends, well welcome from the European Movement's offices here in Brussels. We're delighted to have you with us at this 8th edition of Talking Europe, the first one after the summer break. For this occasion, we are very glad to have with us the Acting Director General of DG Justice and Consumers, Mrs. Salla Saastamoinen. She is responsible for dealing with some of the most important dossiers that the Commission is currently busy with. Namely, she's covering issues like human rights, the rule of law, gender equality, and of course, consumer affairs. Salla, thank you very much for joining us today. On behalf of all our viewers across Europe, I want to repeat that it's a real pleasure to have you with us. Perhaps you can start a conversation with what took place yesterday. The President of the European Commission gave her State of the Union address. And as we all had the opportunity to listen, some of the things that you and your team are working on were featured quite prominent in that speech. Before we go into details, maybe I'd like to get your reaction and your thoughts on the speech and some of the things that the EU is working on justice, human rights, the rule of law.
Thank you, Petros, and thank you to the European Movement for the invitation for this afternoon, and also greetings from my side from Brussels to everybody either here in Brussels or elsewhere in Europe. Yesterday, indeed, we were following the State of Union speech, the 10th speech, and this time the President von der Leyen. When I look at it from the side of our Directorate General, Justice and Consumers, I would, let's say, pick three issues which are also very much on our agenda today. First, the rule of law. As the President stated, the European values are the common basis for the work of the Union. So the rule of law, including democracy, fundamental rights, these are coming from the treaties and they should be reflected in all policy areas. Specifically on the rule of law, the President announced that our work will develop in the context of the annual rule of law report. We will namely start giving recommendations to the member states on the basis of the assessment that we have done. So this is once again an evolving area showing the importance of the rule of law work. Unfortunately, indeed, we cannot take that for granted everywhere in Europe. Second point to mention from our perspective was the unfortunate consequences of the pandemic in the side of the gender equality and the increased threat for the gender-based violence. When in the pandemic we have been in the confinement, it has been more difficult for the possible victims of the gender-based violence to seek protection. And this is one of the reasons that we want to work also on that area. We had identified this violence against women as one of the issues to fight against, to eradicate in our gender equality strategy from the last year, from March last year. So this is an area where we have been building already our action, and we will come with a proposal by the end of the year. Naturally, taking into account the international frame, namely the Istanbul Convention, where the EU we have proposed that EU would become party to that one too. And then thirdly, the State of Union speech made a strong reference to the digital and green transition. And this twin transition, it cannot happen without the consumers. So it influences to the consumers, but we need also the people to change their behaviors, for example, for this green transition. So this is where we are working. There will be for the digital transition, we have already now prepared and have some legislation under negotiations. For the green transition, the new information was to work more for the right to repair. That will be an initiative for the 22. But all this on the consumer protection, or in this consumer policy, we have already indeed worked for the strategic basis. We have a new consumer agenda with these priority areas that cover the green transition and digital transformation, but also quite much stressing the redress, the enforcement aspect, as well as the specific needs of the certain vulnerable consumer groups. So in that sense here, with this type of let's say the support and guidance from the highest political level, our work indeed continues also this year and next year.
Yeah. Indeed, you have a plate full, so to say, but everything you touched upon is remarkably important. If I may, I'd like to follow up a little bit on the question of gender equality and especially the defense of women's rights. And in that particular area, have you seen any progress taking place in gender equality? You mentioned the challenges we have seen in this area, especially in the last 2 years. But how do you feel, is there progress being made, both at the European level, but also at the national level with regards to women's rights?
Yeah. In the gender equality, women's rights, when we look that broadly, we are also progressing. For example, on the women's position on the employment and as part of the labor market, the larger number of the women works than before in the history. I mean, we were that was the situation when we went through the pandemic, which influenced, but the trend has been very, very positive. That's an example. So that's where we want to have, where the equal opportunities allow everybody to thrive. So that is an example where in the EU we are in the good position. But naturally, also in each areas, like also relating to labor market, we can improve. And an example is there then that we still have a pay gap and the pension gap. And on the pay gap, we have taken measures in the EU for a long time. It's one of the, let's say, the oldest cases is to aim for the equal pay for the equal work. But as we are not fully there, we have proposed to increase the transparency of the payments. So that way we want to value this women's work, which is in high level of the participation on the labor market, but we need to pay women also fairly and equally in all areas. So I mentioned that we do still have a gender pay gap, and that's around 14%. So this is something that we try to now tackle with a proposal for a binding pay transparency measures that aim to ensure that the women and men in EU get equal pay for equal work. And that is through one aspect, this transparency. Naturally, the non-discrimination work over the years has already taken various measures. There are when thinking, for example, the participation in the women in the decision making, whether in politics or in the management in the companies, so in private side, we do see improvements. We are not yet in the, let's say, in the fully on the equality, but the situation, the trend is right. The only thing that it takes too long. Sometimes if we look at the trend, it will take tens of years before we come to the equal situation unless we do something. So that's why we need to also have continuous measures. And then on that area that I already mentioned, which is the violence against women or gender-based violence, that is a situation, that is an area where, unfortunately, I think the problems remain, and then they are influenced by events like the pandemic. But that is something that's still a kind of rooted type of the gender inequality. It's something which very, for me as a woman, is very difficult to understand, and I'm that way concerned that it is also then the younger women specifically who are victims when one takes, for example, online hate speech against women. So this type of the violence, and that's something that we will aim to tackle also in the future.
Indeed, and especially on that particular point, considering how much of our lives we now live online, and that percentage increased over the last 2 years during the lockdowns, I think it's very important. As you know, the European movement organizes every year the Women of Europe Awards to recognize the role women play in our society in general and European integration in particular. And recently, in one of the editions of the awards, we also held a discussion around how to make the online space safer for women, because the violence that they experience there actually forces women off those platforms and increases inequality. And I think the work that the Commission does in that regard is really, really important, and we're always happy to work with you on that. As I mentioned before we started, those discussions have been going on now for a while, but we have intensified them, especially in the context of the Conference of the Future of Europe. And this is, for those of our viewers following from different parts of the EU, it's an opportunity for all of us to come together on digital platforms, or also in other forms and shapes too, and through discussions and events, to debate the issues that affect the future of Europe the most. So, this is an opportunity also for our viewers to have their voice heard in the context of the conference. And for that reason, please don't hesitate to ask questions or raise your opinions in whichever platform you're following this, be it social media, our website, or anywhere else. I'll be taking those questions and putting them forward to Salla, but while you're all thinking about it, maybe I can build a bit of discussion on the rule of law. Like you said, we cannot take it for granted. Even within the EU, there are several challenges that we are facing. The report that the Commission produced not so long ago highlighted where we have successes and where there are improvements, but also identified some of the threats and the challenges. Do you mind sharing your thoughts a little bit on those threats? What do you think are the main threats and challenges for the rule of law in our union at the moment?
We have indeed working to monitor and then also again take measures to improve the rule of law situation. Our monitoring, one of the monitoring tools is this rule of law report that you mentioned. This year it was the second report that we issued. We were looking at 4 areas. One is this efficiency and independence of the judiciary. A second one relates to the corruption. Third one on the media, so media freedom, and then one on the institutional safeguards, or let's say the constitutional safeguards on that type of area. And we do, when looking on that basis, we do have some problems with this independence of justice in certain member states. We need the judiciary that is indeed can function independently in order then to ensure that the commonly agreed laws in national level coming from the union level, they can be implemented for the benefit of everybody without political or other external influence. So that is then one area. Furthermore, when going then broader, we are naturally monitoring the situation also in the fundamental rights side in broader. And that's, for example, then when we aim for the union of equality in the broad sense. We see certain problems on the area that there is a discrimination on the grounds that it is forbidden, including, for example, on the ground of sexual orientation. So this is a question that we are discussing with certain member states. This discrimination as such, it can be also then combined with the judiciary. For example, earlier we have treated the cases where there were problems on the discrimination on the basis of the age for the judges, and that was actually then let's say threatening the functioning of the judicial system. So that we have tackled. So, but that was an example how we are then combining the fundamental rights situation and then looking at the efficiency and judiciary in the member states. Naturally, this situation of the media and the journalists is also of concern and maybe increasing concern. The Commission actually today adopted a recommendation for the protection of the safety of the journalists. We have had the very public famous cases that have led even to the death of the journalists. So the free media where the and the society where the journalists can bring and make this background work, showing also the problems of the society freely, criticizing when needed. That's an important aspect, and on this side, that is also one of the sides that we need to monitor carefully, need to tackle whenever needed.
One of our viewers, Joseph, is asking a comment on the status of LGBTQI rights in the EU, especially as they're affected by the rule of law. We've seen that there have been some worrying moves in certain member states, Hungary namely, with regards to the rights of LGBTQ people. Would you care to share your thoughts on Joseph's question? What is the Commission doing with that regard?
Yeah. The LGBTI rights is an area where we want to see also that the glass is half full, in a sense that the legal protection and legal situation of the LGBTIQ persons has actually improved in the member states. One can just think that as an example, the same-sex unions have been adopted in increasing number of the member states. So that way the rights are improving in the member states. Let's say legal rights. At the same time, this group of citizens is subject indeed to the hate speech, hate crime, and discrimination. So we see also these challenges, and it was the Commission has actually it was when in 1920 we have used for the strategic thinking to cover the mandate of the current von der Leyen Commission. And we also adopted, that is the first ever adopted strategy to advance the rights of the LGBTI persons. And we want to tackle their different areas. One is the, let's say, the safe society, so increasing security, tackling indeed with the hate speech, hate crime when needed. There's also an area where we want to further improve the legal rights of the LGBTI community. And in that area, we want to deal with the problem that if a rainbow family moves from one country to another, the children's position is not always recognized. So the relation between the child and the parents, which was legal in one country, is not always recognized in others. And this was, by the way, that was also in the State of Union context, in the letter of intent, where the Commissioner now announced and confirmed the future proposal projects. This proposal is mentioned, so it's one of the high priorities that we are trying to look at the moment.
That is indeed very encouraging to hear. The EU in general, the Commission in particular, is a champion when it comes to human rights, and in many ways a trailblazer, having been at the forefront of defending those rights. We've seen that there have been some confrontational exchanges with countries like Poland and Hungary, and at the moment, the fact that they have breached EU law has pitted them against the European Commission. Are there any developments in that regard? And if I may, do you think that the Commission has the necessary tools in its disposal to defend the values that underpin the European project?
It is a challenging situation. We go for the various tools, one, the monitoring through the report, and then future through the recommendations. But we are using this dual approach. We need dialogue with these countries. But if the dialogue doesn't help, we need to take also the binding measures. And so this is one aspect. And there I mentioned that when we prepared the rule of law report, we have had more than 400 meetings with all the member states. So there is this continuous dialogue where we are learning of the situation, but where we are also then exchanging, and the member states between seven are exchanging of the best and good practices. And it's not always only exchanging good practice, they do raise between each other also then the problematic situations. But when this dialogue has not been sufficient, we have been quite firm of taking also then the tool of the infringements. So when the Commission has the possibility for a legally bring the member states even then to the European Court of Justice. And this is the case now with the Poland, and that concerns the position of the disciplinary chamber in the Polish system, or this disciplinary system in Poland, where we consider that it hasn't been established in an independent way. And in this case, we have used the tool of the infringements. We have asked interim measures from the court to stop these disciplinary procedures until the disciplinary chamber has been well independently established. The court granted this, granted our demand, and now we have again the dialogue means that we are hearing also the member state, in this case Poland. What we learned during the summer, we considered that they have not taken all the points that the court had asked. So thus now in some weeks ago, so it was in 7th of September, we decided then to bring the interim measures, so ask to enforce these interim measures with the financial sanctions when necessary. So we are, I think that we have, we do listen member states, we do have a dialogue, but we also want to see then results. And if not, we are a union of law, union of justice in the sense, but union of law, that we have the possibility to work through the court, and we will do that. Maybe to then mention, we have talked about the various tools, but naturally we have the tool also following the link to the union funding. So we have to ensure that the union funding does not go to that type of the project or the structures that would be violating the fundamental rights, the Charter of Fundamental Rights, or that would not respect the rule of law. So it's about the protection of the union budget. And we have there also quite new tools, the conditionality regulation that applies from the beginning of this year. So this is something that we are now preparing to put into the practice. We need still guidance. Commission promised to do guidelines. We are working on that, and then we are checking for the structural funds. We are checking through the enabling conditions that they are respecting the rights, the fundamental rights, as in the Charter of Fundamental Rights. So this is, as one can see, that there are various tools, and this shows that these values that we started, actually also our talks today, they are really the important basis and the current, actually then the starting point for the work of the Union in all areas.
And I think it's very important to always remind ourselves that array of tools available, and also to underline that these are utilized in defense of citizens' rights. They're not targeting any country or population in particular. They're targeting governments who might not be protecting the rights of their citizens as they should. And that's where the European Union, the European Commission intervenes. And I think that is very, very important, because indeed the Commission is a guardian of the protections, the treaties and the protections of treaties afford. If I may ask, what can we as civil society do? The European movement is a network of civil society organizations present across the EU. How can civil society help the Commission in defense of the rule of law and those values that underpin the European ideal?
The civil society is one of, let's say, firstly, it's one of our important dialogue partners in all the member states. So we have, it is this role of the bringing the information from the ground level, pointing out the country that they know, all the 4 areas that I mentioned, for example, in this rule of law report, how they are functioning in that country. So that's a very important role. You were quite right. Our interlocutor in formal procedures, that's the government. When we take measures, the country, the government, not against the people, not against the civil society. So we have, but we want to have the information from the civil society. So that's one aspect. Then second aspect is to work there on the ground, bringing the European values forward, and that we want to support also. And this is then I bring it back. Then I bring it to our own funding instruments that we have here in DG Justice and Consumers. We have a new program, Citizenship, Equality, Rights and Values program, where let's say the funding doubled for this new multi-annual framework for the next 7 years. And there's a new strand, which is the support for the civil society around Europe. And we want to catch not only big European-wide players, but also smaller civil society associations who are really doing the ground level work that brings forward the European values, fundamental rights, and equality. So there, I would encourage. We do have we are launching the calls for the union level funding. So there, I encourage to bring good projects there, and that way participate in this really the groundwork. And then thirdly, I would mention that you also referred to the Conference of the Future of Europe, and that is the current exercise where we need to actors to promote this conference and incite the citizens' participation at all levels, from the local level to the European level. We have a conference has an online platform functioning in all the languages, and that collects ideas and discussions that are really kind of pan-European level. They can start from a local ideas, but through this by this means and discussion, they can be brought then up to the European level. And that is then one aspect what I would also encourage everyone, all the civil society, to make use of this opportunity to make the voice heard. The motto we have here is that the future is in your hands, and that is something that I would underline. The idea is that this is not only a mere listening exercise. The institutions, including Commission, we have committed of following up what comes out from this conference.
Indeed. And I'd like to echo that. And as I mentioned earlier, the purpose of this discussion is also to raise awareness around the Conference of the Future of Europe and the opportunity that it provides all of us to express our thoughts, no matter how simple they might seem. Every idea counts, indeed. And I will just also touch upon on your point with regards to funding, because I think the role the Commission plays there is hugely important. We've seen a shrinking of the civic space in many member states and the drying up of financial support for civil society. Governments often use that as a tool to silence or coerce civil society. And I think the fact that the European Commission steps in and tries to fill that void, both at the European level, but also at the national level, more importantly, is very appreciated and welcome indeed. And yes, us and a lot of our members are making full use of that support that the Commission is providing, and we're very grateful for it. If I may come back a little bit to what we discussed around the rule of law and how it is perhaps those disagreements or when the dialogue doesn't work as well as we would like to with member states, sometimes it's used by certain leaders to fan anti-European sentiment. There's often this rhetoric used that the EU is attacking us. We are here to defend you, but the EU is attacking us. And we have seen this in a variety of situations in several member states on gender equality, respect for sexuality and other issues. How does the Commission deal with that hijacking of genuine efforts to protect citizens' rights and this anti-European sentiment that sometimes generated?
We are first to. I would recall that even in the highest level, it's the Commission, but it's also the member states. So in the European Council level, the European leaders have condemned this, for example, the anti-discriminatory measures, and they have taken the leaders from their word then to discuss the matters, and there is the development on that sense that these values are discussed even between the European leaders, and that's something which is kind of the peer influencing also on this type of the anti-European feelings. What we are also then working, and that's quite important, is the work to tackle with the disinformation. We have seen that there are information coming in the member states that's not correct. So that's something that is distorting, for example, what the union is doing. And when we have used this example of LGBTI, there, for example, this fact of calling that an ideology, that's not an ideology. So that's something that it is that's what goes to this towards the disinformation. So that's something that we have, where we have then also campaigns. That means that through monitoring, reporting, correcting, that's when one aspect of our work for these member states. And then, as I said, I really appreciate the role of the civil society, because they can put the discussion in the context of their own country, and then we try to also support that.
Very much. And indeed, I think also what we are trying to do is, in an effort to deal with this kind of disinformation or kind of distortion of reality, it's important to reach beyond those that necessarily agree with us and approach audiences that are still undecided about those issues, because obviously when information comes from one dimension, it's difficult to understand what's right and what's wrong. So very often the role of civil society is to put the opposite argument, not just to those that agree with us, but those that are not yet persuaded. And a lot of the work the European movement does is exactly aimed at reaching out to persuadable audiences that we can still persuade that defending the values of the EU is very important indeed. Speaking of values, you mentioned actually that just today, and again, we're very lucky, you presented the first ever recommendation on how to strengthen the safety of journalists. Could you tell us a bit more about that initiative? I think, again, we're very lucky to have you here with us on the day that this was presented, and we're very interested to hear some of the measures that you are putting forward.
Well, this is a recommendation to the member states to set up certain measures. For example, giving legal aid to the journalists. It goes so far that even then asking the member states to offer shelter if somebody is really at the life threat on the situations. It is building up on the networks and experts to bring information and to bring also follow up and monitoring of the situation. So this is one let's say was a starting point. We also announced then now that we are developing this policy area with a Media Freedom Act that is planned for the next year. And a third point that we are dealing is with the so-called anti-SLAPP measures. So SLAPPs are strategic litigation actions against for example, on the journalists who are raising problematic points. It means that somebody with a lot of means and in a powerful situation brings the journalist to the court through usually through a civil appeals in that type of the cases, and because of it's kept there as the more powerful partner has indeed the means to pay long procedures, and that actually then has a very also chilling effect to the journalists if you have to be afraid of this type of the strategic litigation. So we are working on also on there in order to develop aid again with the help of the experts to identify the situations and to also to see that whether we could find civil justice procedural measures that would enable to stop this type of situations earlier, so that they wouldn't become as a burden. So we have it is various means that we are trying to improve or ensure the good free media and the good free working conditions for the journalists in Europe.
The main ingredients that make a democracy healthy and alive, certainly the ability of journalists to hold power to account without fear of reprisal is very important. And together, I think with civil society, these are the two arms that can really challenge those in authority when they do things that are not in the interest of citizens. In the remaining time we have, and keeping an eye on some of the questions that are coming in, our viewers will also be interested to hear about the other thing you have under your guidance, consumer policy, and perhaps touch a little bit on some of your ambitions in that policy area, which is hugely important for citizens across the EU.
Yes, maybe a little bit to continue or complement what I already mentioned, that in the consumer policy we contribute to this twin transition in the Europe, these big policy areas of the more sustainable, greener Europe, and then the digital transformation. And as in every policy area, we have to take into account also the influence of the pandemic. We have seen that now during the pandemic, it has been a difficult for the consumers to enforce their rights. An example of what possibly many of us have seen was, for example, with relating to traveling, so with the tour operators or with the flights that were cancelled because of the lockdowns. Not all the consumers have actually received yet their funds or flights reimbursed. So in these areas we want to again improve the situation. In the consumer area we have also already quite a lot of existing legislation, so therefore this enforcement of the rights and redress mechanisms are also very important. As I mentioned, we are working on the several new initiatives, always to improve or to revise the existing ones. For example, we have the goals to empower consumers to have a better information on the products durability or the reparability, and then even working with a certain type of the right to repair, to ask the products to be prepared. When I talk about the information on the products, we have to also protect the consumers against the greenwashing, so that we don't get inaccurate information, something that would be presented to be more environment friendly than it actually is. These are the besides then the legislation, we want to also encourage the companies to have voluntary measures, to take measures already then earlier and faster going further. So we have launched a green consumption pledge. We have already 11 very big companies who have pledged and committed of reducing their environmental impact, including carbon footprint. So that's also important contribution to the bigger Commission Green Deal objectives. Maybe in this side, or just to mention also that we have to take into account the more vulnerable consumers who need specific safeguards, and there, for example, pandemic has influenced. It has influenced in very unequal way also to the European citizens and consumers. There are many who have actually not been able to work and not been able to have such an income as earlier during the pandemic. So we want to now enhance the availability and the quality of the debt services, debt advice in the member states. So this is something that's something that where we try to then reflect and react to the current situation.
That's very interesting indeed. I think we can go on for hours, frankly, not least because your portfolio covers so many interesting subjects, but perhaps we have infringed on your time far too much. I would like to thank you for this impressive exchange of views. It's really interesting and informative to hear you speak, and we're grateful for your time. We look forward to working together, and we wish you good luck for all your work.
Thank you very much. It is indeed now time to make reality, time to execute all these strategies and good plans. So this is very much in the Commission's policy cycle. That's why I also went to these concrete measures that we try to take. And even the most beautiful words, they are not sufficient unless they bring the benefits to all the Europeans. So that, I think, is our common goal. And thank you for your invitation to speak today.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for joining us. And a big thank you to all of those of you who have been watching around Europe. Please stay tuned. The European movement will be organizing more discussions like this and more events. And if you are interested in taking part in this process we call the Conference of the Future of Europe, come to our website, europeanmovement.eu, to find more information on how to access the digital platform, share your thoughts, and take part in events organized around Europe. Until the next time, have a nice afternoon. Thank you for joining us.